It's great to be back from a fun, festive, and educational week in the second city, Chicago. My co-host, the one and only Jim Ward, is second to none. Thank you, dear friends, for stopping by the Big Bid Theory again. Jim, I know you were in mourning, emotional while I was gone, but when I told you about you wept. When I told you about the sights we cited, the food we feasted upon, and what a great time I had in Chicago, well, you got better. How goes it?
I tell you, I mean, a little-known fact or widely known fact, I don't know, but Chicago is literally, I call it my adult home because I've lived the most years there. I've moved back 4 times to the same high-rise every single time.
Yeah, a lot of beautiful buildings. I love the architecture.
Yeah, my building was great. It had a pool on top of the parking garage. The water was so cold, but I was actually nostalgic hearing about like where you were and all. I'm like, I miss Chicago.
A fun town. Well, everyone knows, if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, everybody knows that Jim is winning at yoga. More on that later. On that note, Jim, earlier, I guess it was yesterday, I heard you speaking to Lauren, and you mentioned something about wearing a sash. You don't seem like a sash-wearing guy. What were you and Lauren talking about?
Okay, so back to Chicago, actually. So my longtime girlfriend there, she's a sweetheart, total doll, have no idea why she dated me, was the queen of the St. Patrick's Day parade, like on Ferris Bueller, back when she was, 18. And what's awesome is one of the most selling coffee book tables of Chicago has a picture of her when she was 18. Her hair is huge. It's so big. She hid it from me, and her mother gave it to me. But that being said, so as an ex-queen or whatever, you have to march with all the other Irish clubs. So I'm thinking I'm going to get on top of some riding, moving, heated
float,
anything, float vehicle. Yeah. No. So I'm there with my best friend Dave. He's 6'3", 260, okay? And it's early, and it's cold. Did I mention it's cold?
You mentioned it's cold.
And so, they give us sashes to wear. And, I'm cool wearing anything, right? But I have to admit, it was odd. I didn't know the proper way to put it on or whatnot. But my buddy Dave, it was a fiasco. It barely fit around
6'3", 260.
Totally.
So when I heard you talking about a sash, I thought you were talking about yoga. So it has nothing to do with yoga.
No.
Okay, I was uninformed.
No.
Right, I assumed. And you know what Jeff Spicoli said about assume.
Hey, I know what Jeff Spicoli said about everything.
Now, you were supposed to travel with the TBBT band to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I know you had plans. You guys are going to get some award, I heard, next week. Yeah. But you canceled your plans to Cleveland.
Well, yeah, actually, we were the band, was offered an opportunity of a lifetime. But, I couldn't go to Cleveland right now because...
a little scared?
No, not at all. My allergies. I'm allergic to molds. I just found out, so they're killing me. And Cleveland is going to be a little. It's going to be fine on its own without me there. How about that?
Okay. Well, that sounds fair. Now, some of you may know by now. Last time we had part 1 of our visit with Dr. Colin Clark, a noted expert, really a guy known around the globe as an expert on terrorism. We've all heard what I call soundbite experts. You turn on one of the news shows, and these people don't add a lot of depth. Maybe they give a saucy nugget or two, but when it comes time for real conversation, it's deer in the headlights kind of stuff. Well, Dr. Clark, he studies, and has an ultra-impressive understanding of all aspects of terrorism. Well, the ratings for part 1 of the interview were off the charts, even for this show. And Jim,
which is amazing.
And I was going to say, you and I don't like to toot our own horn, but
I do.
I have to believe that Dr. Clark's visit was a big part of the reason we had such a great audience for last show.
Yeah, very much so. And if you guys have not started following him on Twitter, I highly advise it. And Bill will get you that information.
At Colin P. Clark.
Yeah. So right after when we'll get to this, Dallas happened.
Yeah.
I went to his Twitter page, and first thing he pointed out. I thought this was fascinating. at the time, and I still do, was the use of the robot being, he said he had never seen anything done like this by law enforcement. And it was like really early in the morning. Yeah, I just happened to check it out because I like his Twitter feed. And and then everyone started talking about that. But it was interesting. He's just a sharp guy across the board.
As many of you heard last time, Dr. Clark, who, by the way, is author of Terrorism, Inc., he touched on his background. He provided just a rough overview of terrorism and talked some about the financing involved in keeping terrorist groups alive. Here in part 2, Dr. Clark continues, and folks, stop right there. You don't want to miss this. Dr. Clark reveals who most concerns him when it comes to the world of terrorism.
Crazy.
Possibly, maybe you'll be surprised at his response. Here's part 2 of our visit.
Does ISIS have a central financial power structure? And I've done some reporting on it, some in lowercase letters. We're talking about a financial structure, a lot of organization.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of organization, a lot of time and resources dedicated into getting money, because you've got to remember that this is a group that prides itself on the caliphate, on state building, and we talk about it oftentimes. We laud the group as the most successful and richest terrorist group in the world, and I grant that. I think that's true. But for all of their credits, they've got a lot of debits as well, right? So they've got a lot of social services they need to provide. They've got to keep the lights on, literally in this case. They've got to maintain the oil infrastructure where they're getting their resources. These refineries don't run themselves. So, let's take a step back, take a deep breath, right, and say, okay, this is a group that makes a lot of money, but they spend a lot of money, right, to promote their own legitimacy. Is this model self-sustaining? Particularly given, U.S. coalition airstrikes on cash storage depots, on elements of the oil infrastructure, which I think is having some effect. And so there's been a lot of hyperbole surrounding the group ISIS. It came out of nowhere for some people. But this is the next incarnation of al-Qaeda in Iraq. This is a group that's been around, and I think we've got to be more measured in our response in the way we talk about this group. It's not the most powerful thing ever known to men. Yes, this is a terrorist group, and yes, they've had some battlefield successes, but those successes are now being reversed. They're losing territory. Their foreign fighter recruitment has dipped by as much as 90%, according to a recent Washington Post article. So I think we've got to, be a bit more measured in the way that we speak about this group, because often the way that the media portrays this group, overinflates it and leads to its own self-defense purpose.
ISIS and al-Qaeda, as you're well aware, ISIS and al-Qaeda are in the same sentence together often, whether it be news, internet, reports, conversations like ours. The central financial power structure, is it the same for ISIS and al-Qaeda, or are there some significant differences?
Yeah, so the biggest difference I would point to is that al-Qaeda relied a lot on external sponsorship from rich individuals in the Gulf, whereas from what we've seen, ISIS does not really rely on external state sponsorship, which in effect makes it more difficult to counter, right? Because those external sponsors, that's the kind of stuff you could get at with sanctions, with Treasury Department. ISIS raises and spends most of its funds locally, with extortion being a major component of the group's financing. And so if the group controls the territory and is able to kind of bully and coerce the people and extort the people in the territory that it controls, well, how do you cut off that method? And I think that's something that the international community is struggling to come to terms with.
I don't know if it's ISIS. I don't know if it's al-Qaeda. Everybody likes rankings. They like to rank things, keep them organized 1 through 10.
Yeah, of course.
Let me ask you this. So
we can play this game. Let's go down this road.
Right.
I'll give you my analogy, because we were talking about this the other day with some colleagues, and I think I was even quoted in a New Republic article saying this, and I thought, oh no. I said that ISIS is Google and al-Qaeda is AOL.
Okay.
If that gives you any sense.
Yeah, well, let's expand that outside of ISIS and al-Qaeda. Which terrorism organization around the globe today would you say has the most solid financial or financing mechanism in place? Is it one of those two?
That's a good question. I'd say ISIS most likely. And I'd put AQ further down the list. I'd certainly point to the Afghan Taliban because of the group's ability to make money off of the opium trade in Afghanistan. So certainly that would be a competitor. You've got to look at a group like FARC, even though they're flirting with peace negotiations right now and their ability to make money from the cocaine trade, as well as other avenues. So you've got to look at the sources. It's not even necessarily the group, but if you're a group like FARC in Colombia or a group like the Taliban in Afghanistan, you're really benefiting from geography, right? Because those drugs can only grow in certain places with that climate, and so we see 90% of the world's opium in a place like Afghanistan. We see the lion's share of coca in those parts of Latin America that that FARC has access to.
Here's kind of an off-the-wall question. Which terrorism organization or bad actor, is there a single figure?
When you say bad actor, we're not talking James Franco. We're talking mostly
apologies,
insurgent group.
Yeah, apologies to James Franco fans out there listening to the podcast. But it could be a group. It could be the person. Who most keeps you up at night?
Yeah,
who's the biggest threat?
I would say the country of Pakistan. If we could bring it to a state level, because here's a country that the country of Pakistan in general, because this is a country with nuclear weapons, and it's a country that's facing multiple internal insurgencies from the TTP or the Pakistani Taliban, and also plays a very dangerous double game by supporting other terrorist organizations, including the Afghan Taliban, but also groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, because Pakistan views everything through the zero-sum lens of India. And there's obviously, as you are probably aware, a conflict over Kashmir, the disputed territory of Kashmir. And so that's a country that's very unstable and possesses nuclear weapons. And so that's the country I think that or the threat writ large that keeps me up at night. I'd probably throw North Korea somewhere on that list just because the leader is so unpredictable. Anybody that's bringing Dennis Rodman over for counsel needs to have their head examined, that's not a knock on the 1990s Bulls by any stretch.
Well, everybody needs rebounding.
That's not who you want to be getting it's not who you want to get your foreign policy advice from. And if I was going to bring over some Bulls, why not Tony Kukoc or John Paxson or maybe someone a little bit more level-headed?
Okay, Franco fans, I apologize. The Dennis Rodman fans, both of you are on your own.
Deal with it.
You deal with it, right? I assume you're a Knicks fan, right?
I am, unfortunately.
Yeah. So there's maybe a little resentment there. I kind of caught that. So let's keep going. Let's keep going down this road. Continuing incidents of terrorism. Orlando is, I guess, the most recent that has received the most coverage, and I'm talking both here in the U.S. and abroad. If you had the decision-making authority, Dr. Clark, if somebody made you, king for a day, what is the one thing we should or shouldn't be doing? You can only pick one.
In terms of counterterrorism?
Yeah, absolutely. Dealing with terrorism.
Yeah. I would argue that we should be devoting more resources to what's viewed as the softer side of counterterrorism. So we're very good at devoting money to the kinetic side, right? And by kinetic, I mean things that go boom. Tanks, bombs, missiles, guns, right? Because we can see the return on investment there. We can say, look, there's three bad guy buildings blown up. There's 100 dead terrorists, and we like to quantify things, right? And Congress likes to know what we're getting for our money. Is this working? Even though we've long ago, think about Vietnam, figured out that the body count thing is not a good metric of success, right? But we're still very much stuck in that mindset. I would argue that we should devote far more resources to countering the narrative, right? So countering the ISIS brand, countering the ability of this group to operate online, to spread its very virulent propaganda, and to win over adherents all over the globe. I mean, when you think about a group like ISIS, it's pretty amazing to me because very early on in the conflict, some open source intelligence reporting said that there were approximately 15,000 citizens from 80 countries fighting with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, which made it the most significant transnational jihadist conflict of all time. We're talking about fighters that have traveled from far afield, including many fighters from the United States, but also various European countries, Australia, and then countries not nominally associated with the global jihad, countries like Chile and Cambodia. When there's individuals in those countries that are being radicalized, that are receiving and clearly accepting the message that ISIS is putting out there, and then finding the wherewithal and logistics to make it to the battlefield, that's a huge indicator of failure on the part of our ability to counter this narrative that they're putting out there. Look, the message they're selling is one of violence. They're cutting people's heads off and burning people alive. So that shouldn't be too hard to counter, but we still struggle with it.
I thought you brought up a good point a moment ago where, you were saying the approach has been to throw bombs and make things go boom to counteract people who are, making things go boom in response, and it does seem a little disjointed. No
Look,
doubt.
don't get me wrong. I think that's part and parcel of the response. This is war, after all, right? And I don't mean to distill that by any means, but that can't be the only approach,
right?
And that can't be the only response, right? I mean, what's the
Sure.
saying? When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That can't be the only tool in our toolkit. I think we're a bit more sophisticated country than that. At least I like to hope so.
The report that we did here at Bid Prime, it was a couple of months ago, on terrorism, counterterrorism, and so back in April, I suggested that in the battle against terrorism, if you're doing things right, we all have a role. It's not just the military, it's not just law enforcement, it's not just the intel community, but Joe and Joanne Citizen have a role as well. Assuming that's true, Dr. Clark, what should the average citizen do in the fight against terrorism?
Well, I think, again, going back to what I talked about before, being aware, right? It's become a catch-all now, but if you see something, say something, and I believe that is true because I think, some plots can be stopped. If you look at the San Bernardino attackers, they had been, stockpiling things in their garage. It's this very fine line, right? Because people don't want to be accused of profiling. And so I think that played a role from what I read in the news reporting on it, of the neighbors not wanting to report these
right.
people because, that's something, civil liberties are an issue. So I think from a citizen perspective, that's part of it. If you see something, say something, but also educate yourself. Go out there, read. Don't read just the same stuff, right? So, if you find yourself that you're a Fox News person or you're an MSNBC something, see what the other side is saying. We've become such a partisan country that we're attracted to the things we already believe, and they reinforce our already existing beliefs. Go out there and read, and not necessarily on the internet. I joke with my college students sometimes. I say, guys, what's that big building over there? It's made of glass and steel. It's right, and they all kind of look at me, and I'm like, it's a library. Anybody know what's in there? There are books. There's magazines. Because it's like, oh, I'm just going to read it from the internet, and I try to explain to them what a legitimate source is. And look, that's great if someone said that, but I don't want you citing your Uncle Bob's blog. No offense to your Uncle Bob. I'm sure he's a smart guy. But look, there's a lot of material out there. There's so much content. Go out there and read, educate yourself. Not everybody has to go and get a PhD, but recognize that there are nuanced sides to the argument, that it's more complex than they're bad and we're good, that we're good and they're evil, and read and find out what this stuff is all about.
Absolutely. Educate yourself, right? Go to the library or the library, right?
Yeah, the library, exactly.
Now, you've been involved, Dr. Clark, in an analysis looking at projections for the future. So as we wrap things up here, if you would reach across your desk and grab your crystal ball, what
Sure.
do you foresee as the primary challenges? And I'm going to throw out a couple of numbers here. 5, 10 years from now, or if you want to pick another time frame, you're the guest. You pick a time frame if you'd like.
All right, so what will shape the nature of terrorism and violence in the coming years? I think it's a really great question. I think it's an important question. I'll boil it down to 3 what I call broad factors that seem to be most important in shaping future trends. First, the resolution or the continuation of the many intra and interstate conflicts currently underway. Most importantly, I think the Syrian civil war, but also the conflict in Libya, the conflict in the Sahel, Northern Africa, Somalia, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. I think those are some of the conflicts and current wars that will determine the intensity and geography of future violence. I think the spread of ungoverned space during the past 5 years created an environment that's somewhat conducive to extremism. It's encouraged thousands of volunteers who themselves are eager to fight. And I think until some semblance of security is established, this militancy will breed. I think the second factor is the unprecedented movement of people out of war zones in places like Africa and the Middle East and into mainly the West, right? So this wave of migrants that we saw sweeping over the summer, over the course of the past year, this generation of migrants, unless it's better integrated than their predecessors, could become the new recruiting pool for tomorrow's violent non-state actors. And I think the third factor is the multifaceted conflict within Islam itself, between the vast majority of moderate Sunnis and the smaller sliver of violent Salafi jihadists, and then between Shia and Sunni as represented by this kind of proxy conflict playing out across the region, represented by Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other. And then I think between Islam in general and the West, somewhat fed by Western reactions or overreactions to the perceived threat from groups like ISIL or Al-Qaeda. And so those, I think, are three really important factors. What might strike you is that we have very little ability to affect the outcome of any of those. And so that, I think, is what's most concerning to me.
As you went through the narrative there, that's exactly what was coming to mind, at least on this end of the line, is how much do we as a country, certainly how much do we as a people have in controlling a lot of what's going on. But one thing we can control, and you mentioned it, Dr. Clark, is educating ourselves. Don't rely on, as you said, Uncle Bob's blog or conversation around the dinner table with Aunt Susie on
Sure.
what we should or shouldn't be doing, because there is so much to this. And in preparing for our visit today, I thought to myself, well, there are 1,000 roads we could go down. Let's try to get this down into something that would be meaningful and beneficial to the Big Bit Theory audience.
Absolutely.
So,
I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Clark, again, I appreciate all that you're doing to help educate so many people, and I know you're doing work on behalf of not just the RAND Corporation, but also a number of government agencies as well. So all the best to you in those endeavors. And the final thing I'll ask you, I know from personal experience that one can go to Amazon.com to find Terrorism, Inc. Where else can people go to get their hands on a copy of Terrorism, Inc.?
Yeah, if you go to the main RAND webpage, www.rand.org, there'll be a link to it there, and then I think certain bookstores it may be in. I think a lot of people I usually direct toward Amazon because that tends to
Sure.
be the go-to, but it's probably in some brick and mortar stores as well. And I'm always open to engaging over email if people want to shoot me an email and keep the conversation. I'm also on Twitter at Colin P. Clark, and so I'm always happy to kind of converse on Twitter about terrorism finance, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, or anything else.
And as our audience knows, we will include that contact information in the description of the podcast as well. And one final thing on Terrorism, Inc. It's a great read, but you'll want to sleep with the lights on, maybe for a couple of days. It is some eye-opening information. So, again, Dr. Clark, we do appreciate it. All the best to you, and hopefully down the road we can have you back on to talk even more about this ultra-important topic that affects literally everybody in the United States.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me, and I hope to join you again in the future.
Terrorism, Inc. Get it, folks.
Wow.
Dr. Clark, by the way, and Jim touched on it earlier before the interview, Dr. Clark has offered to return to the show, and we'll for certain have him back on. Of course, it's my hope that when we have him back on, we're talking about the retreat of terrorism. Well, also, Dr. Clark, he encourages you, our listener friends, to reach out to him. And don't forget, the Twitter handle for Dr. Clark is at Colin P. P as in, I don't know, Paul, Peter, but Colin P. Clark, and it's Clark with an E, C-L-A-R-K-E.
And I highly advise his Twitter feed, by the way.
It's a
I
good
really
one,
do.
Now that we have everyone huddled around their mobile devices, their iPads, their desktops, it's that time, the time, for hashtag Crazy Bits.
Sitting in their little hovels.
Jim, do our listeners have hovels? Jim, I have no idea why you're on the studio floor stretching. Does it have anything to do with the Crazy Bit? You can get up now.
Hold on just a second. Okay. So Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Crazy Bids That You Can Win. So this bid today is brought to us by the United States Army and the Department of Veteran Affairs, and it is for a yoga instructor.
That's you.
It's me, but it's also, I have to say this is a first, Bill. A first for TBBT. Okay.
That's a mouthful. Go
exactly.
ahead.
This bid is actually, I think there's somebody better than me that can win this bid. My own yogi, or yoga teacher, I really don't know. Anyway, Lindsay Fools, and I'm just realizing I've never said her name out loud. That's
How do you address her? How do you address her at class?
Lindsay. You know,
okay.
I've never. Her last name, by the way, is Fuls. So, and her first name is equally Lyndsay. Fools.
SAY?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lindsay. I'm telling you,
Lindsay.
the entire thing is confusing. But anyway, she's an amazing yoga instructor. Best in Austin. She teaches at Yoga,
You're kissing up to the teacher.
or Yoga Squared.
Listen to you.
I no, she's that good. But anyway, she's not as good as me. This bid I'm going to win in Fargo, North Dakota, is basically teaching like the most simple forms of yoga to old people.
Can you do yoga in a parka? Did you say Fargo, North Dakota?
Oh, yes, I did. And I'm actually a big fan of Fargo.
I like the movie.
I was going to say,
Yeah, but it's a weird movie.
it's a weird place.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, the further north and the further south you get, the weirder it gets in life, you know? But I digress, and maybe that's just me. So this bid is in Fargo, which is going to be great, actually, to teach because of the enthusiasm and the attendance, because it's a little known fact, North Dakota has more yoga practitioners than any other state.
You are full of it.
No, they do. They do.
Than any state?
Any other state.
Come on.
I think
By percentage-
I'm almost positive I'm right.
Percentage of population, or what are you talking about?
No, total
Overall
number.
numbers?
Yeah.
More than Texas, more than California, more
Combined.
than Florida.
Yeah. It's crazy. They're yoga nuts in Fargo. And North Dakota in particular. The irony is South Dakota, not so much. They're into Pilates.
Oh,
But yeah, no, North Dakota.
that's a bar bet you could win every time.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't bet a whole lot on it. Wink, wink, because I'm pretty sure I'm right. But
Okay.
that being said, this bid I'm going to win is basically a term contract for me to teach Hatha, like Hatha Star Yoga, which just yoga, okay, to a bunch of old people that probably can't hear and think kind of too well. But I can't wait. It'll be a lot of fun. Fargo, be ready.
Here comes Jim Ward. Well, folks, please keep our lights on by downloading, sharing, and following the podcast. By the way, we obliterated, I mean smashed, our single month record for downloads last month. And it's because of you. And by the way, Bill is pointing at the audience. Do you want to be a part of the show? Send the emails, and you and your email could very well become a part of the mailbag segment
Yes.
of the show, and that's coming up in the not-so-distant future.
Scary.
Maybe we'll get that on the next episode. My email address is bcolhane@bidprime.com, and Jim, his email is jward@bidprime.com. At The Big Bid Theory is our Twitter, but it's your Twitter as well. Thanks for following us, liking, and retweeting our tweets. You prefer a more personal touch, friends? Well, Jim, his Twitter handle is Jim Ward, the number 6, Jim Ward 6, and I'm contract_hunter. I know we do crazy bids, but folks, I have a crazy idea. How about everyone respect everyone and be safe next week in Cleveland? Jim, am I going off the deep end there, or is that too crazy?
I think, in all fairness, I think it's way naive. I think
so
it's
too,
incredibly naive. I think it's
hope
going
I'm
to
not.
be. I don't know. I mean, after this whole Dallas thing, I'm not sure what I think about anything. So
I hear you. Well, for Jim, our staff, who, by the way, I went on vacation. We've established that. Well, thanks to the staff who changed out my chair, and also for letting my plant die while I was in Chicago. You're laughing. I think you were one of the co-conspirators.
The chairs were, anyway.
Many thanks again to Dr. Colin Clark. If Trump gets the nomination, will we by then hear back from the Trump campaign? Go Gunners, Barracudas, Tigers, and Bobcats. And we wish you all the best in growing your business.
Jim Ward signing off. Later.
We're having so much fun.